Welcome to today's edition of the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly. I'm Chris Garlock, bringing you voices from the front lines of the working class from across the U.S. and around the world. First up, on Work Stoppage, we dive into the fight against illegal deportations and the role labor plays in defending our co-workers, neighbors, and communities from unjust policies.
You want to build a $5 billion data center? You don't call Elon Musk. You call us! North America's building trade unions. And yeah, that means all of us, including our brother, Smart Apprentice, Kilmar Arbrega Garcia, who we demand to be returned to us and his family now. Bring him home!
Then, on Power at Work, we hear how recent policy changes are impacting hospitality workers in California and what labor is doing to push back.
The twin issue of deportation threats and action against immigrants only creates more of a situation where workers can be exploited.
Next, we go to South Africa. On Buwa Basebetsi Updates, workers at East Rand Recycling Company M&amp Waste are standing up to their employer and demanding better treatment.
She says they are here to support their members who are complaining about their employer who does not want to give them a minimum wage.
From there, it's north to Wisconsin. On We Rise Fighting, UAW Local 291 is out on strike in Oshkosh. We've got the latest from the picket lines.
The company approached us in November and asked for a 6-month extension, a blanket extension, no raises, no nothing, whatever. And we assumed they knew we were going to say no, which we did.
And now something a little different. On Classes of Mail, Alan gets into the nuts and bolts, or scanners in this case, that keep the postal service moving. It's more than you think.
Now, the good news is that your scanner can't get you in trouble on its own. But what it can do is raise red flags for management, and then management comes and asks you, well, what were you doing during this time?
Finally, on Stick Together, we hear from Alexis Vasiliev, author of Striking, or The Rise and Fall of Union Power in the Pilbara. It's a story of struggle, solidarity, and the lessons that still matter today.
By sort of the 70s, they'd kind of turn the tide, tame the bosses, turn the tables on the bosses even, and had kind of built strong union organization.
Plus, network shows have a few things to say about Donald Trump, and he might not like them. Stick around for Harold's Shows You Should Know. It's gonna be a good one.
To your favorite labor podcast, Work Stoppage. My name is John.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Lena.
And we're an entirely listener-supported show.
And so the CWA is fighting back against deportation orders recently issued to 200 immigrant workers at Hires Appliance Park factory in Louisville, Kentucky. These workers from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela have been on work authorization through a program called Humanitarian Parole, which the Trump administration just decided to unilaterally cancel. IUE CWA President Carl Kennenbrew told Labor Notes, quote, "What is happening to our members at Appliance Park is unfolding at workplaces and in communities all across the country. We cannot allow those who are sowing division to win. Blaming immigrants is an age-old trick to create fear and distract us from the takeover of our economy by billionaires," end quote. And the kidnapping of union members across the country has finally spurred more unions into action. We mentioned last week that Jimmy Williams and IUPAT were protesting at the Maryland courthouse last week and demanding freedom for Kilmar Albrego Garcia. His abduction has also finally moved the building trades to action, who had previously touted their strategy of refusing to push back against Trump's attacks on their members. The rank-and-file pressure is working and must increase, and we have a clip of that now.
We need to make our voices heard. We're not red, we're not blue. We're the building trades, the backbone of America. We built a $5 billion, you want to build a $5 billion data center? Want more six-figure careers with health care retirement and no college debt? You don't call Elon Musk, you call us. North America's building trades unions. And yeah, that means all of us, including our brother, smart apprentice, Kilmar Arbrega Garcia, who we demand to be returned to us and his family now. Bring him home.
And you can hear the clapping, but people are actually, that's a standing ovation that he's getting for that comment, which I think, as we've talked about the conservative nature of many of the building trades, is maybe a little surprising, but also really heartening to see that shift in the way that the unions are starting to really, as, you know, we put it, like, actually starting to realize that there is an important part of solidarity that has been being neglected in recent times.
Well, yeah, it's funny. We heard Sean Fain kind of do his riff on "We're not red, we're not blue" earlier, and I gotta say, I think the president of the NABTU wore it a little bit better. I think that he handled it a little bit more nicely.
He did actually. I mean, he was pretty serious about it, and that was good to hear. And as always, labor peace is not in our interest, and solidarity forever.
Solidarity.
Solidarity, everybody.
Hey, this is Errol Schweitzer, host of the Checkout Podcast. The Checkout is proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Hello, powerful people, and welcome back to Power at Work. My name is Seth Harris. I'm a senior fellow at the Burns Center for Social Change. Very excited to have you here for another Labor Reporters Roundtable. Claudia Irizarry Aponte is a senior labor reporter at The City, a nonprofit independent newsroom covering New York City. McKenna Schuler is a news reporter for the Orlando Weekly. Her reporting focuses on state and local government, workers' rights, and housing issues in Florida. And Suhana Hussain is a business reporter covering labor and workplace issues in California for the Los Angeles Times. They're here to help us to understand the biggest stories influencing worker power across the United States. Right. So I want to start out with a really open-ended question for you about what's going on in your part of the country. What is the biggest story in New York City that you have been focusing on for the city?
I would say that immigration is a subject that is front of mind for workers here in New York City. As you mentioned, I've been covering the Democratic mayoral primary here in New York City. And for workers, especially in the private sector, their number one issue right now is immigration. You know, they want a candidate, they want a mayor that can stand up to Trump on immigration. They are terrified of losing their legal work status in the United States. They're terrified of having their TPS status removed in the case of especially Haitian workers in New York.
Temporary protective status. I'm translating for our audience. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, and again, this is across class, across industries. I'm talking about home care workers. I'm talking about building service workers, restaurant workers, academic workers. You're seeing all these attacks from the Trump administration on academics, especially at Columbia University. It's just an enormous moment in the city of the country and for workers in New York City.
McKenna, I want to ask you the same question. You often cover state and local government policy and how that overlaps with worker power issues. In Florida, in a bad way, they overlap a lot, right?
Right. So I would say we're currently in the middle of our 2025 state legislative session here. So where Republicans have proposed or are otherwise swiftly advancing this kind of slate of anti-worker bills that I've been trying to keep my eye on, including proposals to weaken child labor laws for the second year in a row and further undercut public sector unions to make it harder for them to exist. Lawmakers are also advancing proposals that would make it harder to qualify for unemployment benefits, and another that would allow for employers to pay more workers a sub-minimum wage in what is pretty clearly an attempt to circumvent minimum wage increases that Florida voters overwhelmingly approved in 2020. But and regionally, I think what people should know is that despite the South being frequently characterized as anti-union, having low union density, which is true, I still see a lot of new organizing that does happen. That doesn't necessarily always get a lot of media attention for a variety of factors. Labor news is something I try to highlight because I think part of the battle here in states like Florida, where most workers aren't union, is just educating the public on what unions are and what having union representation can look like in your workplace.
Suhana, your beat at the LA Times puts you at the center of some of the most dynamic, some might say innovative worker movements in the United States.
I think in LA specifically, one thing I'm keeping an eye on is sort of workplace safety enforcement, because obviously we had the big fires in January. The Eaton and Palisades fires devastated communities in Los Angeles. And as part of the fallout of that, I think there are going to be a lot of immigrant workers relied on to do debris cleanup. And that comes at a time when the state is reducing investment in workplace safety. And obviously at the national level, workplace safety is definitely not a concern. And the twin issue of deportation threats and action against immigrants only creates more of a situation where workers can be exploited. And debris cleanup can be very unsafe, right? It can expose you to toxic chemicals if you don't have the right training and the right equipment.
Hey, thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again for joining us on Power at Work. We will see you on Power at Work again very soon.
Hello and welcome to Buwa Basebetsi Weekly Update. Here we keep you posted with the developing news and organizing efforts by the Casual Workers Advice Office and Semunya Workers Forum. Semunya Workers Forum has organized this protest march in Boksburg outside M&amp Waste in support of some of the company's migrant workers. M&amp Waste recycles paper, cardboard and plastics. It employs 22 workers, most of them migrants from Mozambique and Malawi, who have been working for the company between 6 and 26 years without work permits. At the end of last year, 9 of these workers took their employer to the CCMA, demanding to be paid the national minimum wage, and won the case on the 13th of December. Matshwanelo Mutumutumu of Semunya Workers Forum says that they are here to put some pressure on the employer.
Lebaka le re tlisitseng monana ke basebetsi ba mona Cairone be leng hore ba lla ka mohiri wa bona e leng ha ba tlo ba fa minimum wage ya bona mme ha ba se ba lwanela ditokelo tsa bona o kgetha hore a ba tebeke ka go mosebetsi ka lebaka la.
She says they are here to support their members who are complaining about their employer who does not want to give them a minimum wage. Now that they have won their case, he wants to fire them, saying they don't have work permits. But when he hired them, he knew that they didn't have work permits. Now that they are fighting for their rights, he wants to fire them. After winning their case at the CCMA, problems for the workers started. On the 7th of February, the employer suspended these workers without pay, telling them he was placing them on a general incapacity, even though they are in no way incapacitated. He told them not to come in if they don't have work permits. Some of these workers say they have worked here when the company was still under NAMPEC 20 years ago. Jordan Mondlane, a Mozambican national, has been with M&N Waste for 17 years. He says if the employer wants to get rid of them, he must do the right thing and pay them their Provident Fund money and for their years of service. Mondlane says they will be happy if they just retrench them because they can see they are never going to be welcome back. He says they must retrench them and give them their monies. He also questions the legitimacy of using the lack of permits as reason to suspend them. He says the employer suspended them for joining Simunye, but he still have migrant workers who work night shifts, and those ones don't have any document. For example, those from Malawi who work night shifts, they don't have even a passport, but they are allowed to work night shifts. It is important to note that the Labor Relations Act also applies to migrant workers even if they do not have a valid work permit. They are still protected against unfair dismissals and can access all dispute resolution mechanisms such as CCMA to raise their concerns with their employer. For Buwa Basebetsi, I am Muslim Zoe.
All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. As always, I'm Rico Rutia here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer. What's up, everyone? This week we are speaking with Ryan Compton, president of the United Auto Workers, Local 291 in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. We are speaking with him because the local has 90 of its members on strike against Cummins Corporation. Cummins Corporation is a producer of axles for vehicles. So we wanted to talk about what's been happening with the strike, what led to the strike, what kind of community support the striking workers have received, and all of that.
We have been on strike since the 18th of March. Our contract expired January 29th of this year, and Cummins has owned us for roughly 3 years. So they knew this contract was coming up. Our international rep, Joe, filed all the paperwork that he needed to file. We sent them all these dates in December, January that we can meet. The company approached us actually didn't approach us, emailed him in November and asked for a 6-month extension, a blanket extension, no raises, no nothing, whatever. And we assumed they knew we were going to say no, which we did. And then they came back with the first time we can meet is the 28th of January, which is one day before the contract is up. And then they could meet the 28th, 29th, and the 30th of January. And then we met a couple times, 3 times. We basically met 3 times about a month apart. So January met 3 days, February met in 3 days, March we met in 3 days, and we did one virtual day in March, which doesn't get a lot accomplished, of course. So then in the end of March, they told us we can't meet for 5 more weeks, basically is what it came down to. And a lot of the members and the bargaining committee included kind of had enough, like, you know, what's going on here? We got to do something here. And so that's when we decided to pull all the members out.
Got it. And how many members is it on the picket line?
We have between 85 and 90.
And we saw yesterday that the United Faculty and Academic Staff members came down to the picket line with a delegation. And
yes.
Can you describe some of that that's been going on since you've been on strike?
It's all been very positive. You know, we have Oshkosh Defense in this town, which is a UAW facility. We have us, that's the UAW facility. Of course, we got the college right across the street from our building. which has been a union facility. That's probably, and of course you have the school district. We have some Fox Valley Tech people, stuff like that. But as far as everybody, the college kids, very positive. It's good to see. So there's quite a lot of unionization in this town, being a Midwest town.
That's something we talk about often on this show is there's so many lessons. There's so many precious lessons we can gather from workers on strike and how they get by and how they extend solidarity and how they flex the worker power and all of that. So thank you for sharing some of the stuff that y'all are doing over there.
All right, I appreciate it.
This is Elise Bryant from the Labor Heritage Power Hour. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classes of Mail. My name is Alan Gigax, and today we are getting back into the Carrier Academy. So the next section of the Carrier Academy that we're going to cover is scanners. Some of the things that your scanner can do is your scanner gives real-time GPS information. So management always knows where your scanner is. It knows how fast your scanner is moving. It knows how long your scanner's been stationary. And all of these things are things that you need to be aware of when you're out delivering the mail. Your scanner will even tell management if it's been stationary for more than 10 minutes or if it's ahead of schedule or behind schedule. All of those things are done with your scanner. Now, the good news is that your scanner can't get you in trouble on its own. But what it can do is raise red flags for management, and then management comes and asks you, well, what were you doing during this time? And you can get yourself in trouble by answering that question and saying, oh, I'm just sitting under the shade tree playing Candy Crush. And that's how you get into trouble. So that's the GPS. Oh, and it can also tell, allegedly, like when you're driving backwards, because it'll have... there's an option on there. It's option O. It's called How Am I Doing? And it has things on there like number of U-turns, long reverses, hard braking, hard acceleration. And then if you tap each one, it'll tell you what the criteria are. And for a long reverse, like it's a reverse, you drive backward for more than 50 feet. Well, how the hell can your scanner tell what direction you're driving, whether your truck is going forward or going backward? There's no way it can tell that. And so, as I understand it, what it is your scanner has an orientation sensor in it, just like your phone. Like when you hold your phone up, it can tell which way you're facing. That's how the GPS in your phone works. And so if you're going down the street in one direction and your scanner's just tooling along, and then you stop and start going in the opposite direction and your scanner never turns around, well, now as far as your scanner's concerned, it's going backward. And so these are some of the things that your scanner does. And it's reasons like that the scanner can't be used as the sole source of discipline. Because who knows where the scanner gets these crazy ideas about what you're doing and what you're not doing. So thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for sticking with me. And I will catch you all next time.
Welcome to another episode of Stick Together with your host, James Brennan. Thanks for joining me. This episode was produced on the lands of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and recognize the ongoing impacts of colonization. Alexis Vasily is a labor historian and industrial relations scholar at Edith Cowan University in Perth, where he lectures in work and employment relations. He has published widely on trade union strategy, is an associate editor of Labor History, serves as a workplace representative, branch committee member, and national councillor for the National Tertiary Education Union. And Alexis is on the show to talk about his new book, Striking Ore, The Rise and Fall of Union Power in the Pilbara. Maybe if we start with talking about the Pilbara region, there's probably many people, people listening around the world, but people even in Australia that may not know what the Pilbara region kind of looks like, what's its significance, and maybe paint us a little bit of a picture about the region there.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, it's a huge region. It's really remote. So it actually takes you 2 hours to fly from Perth and over 14 hours to drive. It's the size of Spain. And essentially the iron ore industry there is a powerhouse, not just of the WA economy, but of the national economy. It developed really rapidly, that the industry in the late 1960s, and so at first it was really like low pay, long hours, no respite from the heat, poor food quality, authoritarian bosses. It was kind of pretty bad. But it was company towns. So the iron ore company. So there was three of them in the 60s, and then a fourth, Robe River, joined in the early 70s. But the companies owned the town, so there weren't local councils. And they actually built something like 8 new towns in a period of just a few years. But by sort of the 70s, they'd kind of turned the tide, tamed the bosses, turned the tables on the bosses even, and had kind of built strong union organization. And so what it kind of looked like was a lot of people wanting to live up there. So you get heaps of people saying, I just only intended to stay there for 6 months, for the money, and then I stayed 10 years. So that was sort of a common refrain. People worked 5-day weeks, 8-hour days. I had one person, well, actually more than one person I interviewed for the book, said that they played sport every night of the week. So it was, union and community were sort of synonymous. And I guess one of the things about the book is it's kind of the story of Australian unionism over that time period, but in a really exaggerated way. So, perhaps a lot of listeners would have a sense of the 1970s as being more broadly in Australia a period of militancy. In a sense, the workers in the Pilbara were kind of swimming with the tide, but they're even more militant than a lot of in a lot of other places. So they'd go and strike more, kind of thing. But then today, it's more deunionized than average, and what we see today is a pretty horrible picture of unionism across Australia. So I kind of think it sort of can draw out insights because of that sort of extreme case study.
Thanks to Alexis for joining us on the show today to talk about his book, Striking Ore, The Rise and Fall of Union Power in the Pilbara.
Thanks again for tuning into the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly. Now, if there's one thing we can count on, is that labor radio and podcast producers are never short on insight or opinions, especially when it comes to, shall we say, certain political figures. To break it all down with a little bite and a lot of brains, here's our own Harold Phillips with this week's roundup of shows you should know.
Thanks, Chris. Social media guy Harold Phillips here again, folks, and if there's one thing our dear President Trump loves, it's when people talk about him. Well, our labor radio and podcast producers are certainly talking about him, but not necessarily in the way he might like. See what I mean in these shows you should know for the week of April 13th. Max gets an on-the-ground view of the Trump administration's all-out assault on institutions of higher education and the people who live, learn, and work there, from Todd Wolfson and Chinjerai Kumanika on working people. Stephen and Rachel talk with Oregon Education Association board directors Julia Bartow and Brian Zauber-Reed about their experiences as union leaders and how they're responding to Donald Trump on Labor Radio on KBOO. Mark and Jim share audio from the Missoula Hands Off rally on April 5th and from a Montana for Palestine rally that followed it on Voice of the People. But for all of Trump and Musk's attacks on government, let's face it, folks, some parts of government just work. One of those is the Library of Congress, and good news, their America Works podcast is back. In the first episode of the show's latest season, master taxidermist Sonny Amato, who has been operating his own taxidermy business in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for over 50 years, talks about learning and plying his trade. And hey, why do we only have to talk about the American government? Big Dan Repicoli shares his favorite haunts and talks about the pride he feels when miners tell him about the tens of thousands of dollars of extra pay they're getting because of the Australian government's new laws on the Mining and Energy Union podcast. But hey, look, there are plenty of podcasts out there that focus on the government. We're the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Even though it's kind of hard to ignore what's happening in the government, we do look at other things. For instance, a group of organizers discuss how to overcome internal divisions in unions. A recently organized Greensboro REI worker talks about the company's image versus its union busting, and more on the Heartland Labor Forum. You can be sure that no matter what happens in the government, ours or somebody else's, in unions or in workers' daily lives, our labor radio show and podcast producers are gonna keep talking about it. You can find out what they're talking about by following us on social media at Labor Radio Net on Blue Sky and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. So you can find out what they're saying in the latest episodes that they release to the world. And hey, if you want to find links to these shows I mentioned or the over 200 other labor radio shows and podcasts in the network, you know where to go. laborradionetwork.org. Back to you, Chris, and hey, don't pay too much attention to what happens in the government. We've all got more important things to think about, like, what are we going to do over the weekend? That organized labor fought for and won for working people all over the world.
Hey, that's it for this week's roundup from the Labor Radio Podcast Network, your source for worker voices, labor news, and stories that matter. Check out all of these shows and more at laborradionetwork.org. This podcast recorded under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. The Labor Radio Podcast Weekly edited this week by Captain Swing. I produced the show, and our social media guru always and forever is Mr. Harold Phillips. For the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, this has been Chris Garlock. Stay active and stay tuned to your local labor radio podcast show. We will see you next week.